if people just pay a little attention to what does mess up their lymph system and what enhances their lymph function, their health and their life will be a lot better. So Chinese medicine is a system of healing that I've studied in college, not from an academic, not from a clinical point of view, but an academic point of view. And it really has a framework for understanding all the dynamic systems of the body and how they interrelate and how they connect. And essentially what you're talking about, Dr. Lemole, is that the lymph system is this network that connects all the networks in the body. And that we have to have those systems in balance and function to be healthy. So what was your insight in writing Yin Yang and You that helped you understand lymph from a Chinese medicine perspective? Because you also have the sort of Western biomedical perspective, and you bring those together. I'm curious about what you thought about as you sort of learned your father-in-law's work and what you're doing.
Well, the big epiphany is that we give lots of health advice, and we try to explain why these bits of advice make sense using whatever biomechanical models we have, like the heart's connected to the lungs, connected to your mouth and the air moves, all the stuff people who are listening to this podcast know well. But they're often bits of advice that are really important where we don't truly have that depth of insight. And it turns out that the lymph system, which is a forgotten system that's vitally important to the body, is a way of explaining it. But the Chinese had their own way of explaining it, a 5,000-year-old model developed by farmers long before we had deep insights into some of the mechanical structures that we have today. But it still seemed to work. After all, if something works for 5,000 years, you weed out the bad stuff.
Yeah.
And so in traditional Chinese medicine, they based it on 5 elements. And basically 5 of everything, 5 seasons, and the chakras would move around and so end up with this wisdom. And again, just to, the seasons were important because they had the 4 seasons we know of, right? But they also had an early summer, late summer, because in the central Chinese plains where a lot of traditional Chinese medicine, the philosophy arose, there was an early dry summer and a late wet summer. So they had 5 seasons. Then they had 5 elements: the wood, fire, earth, metal, water. These were how they thought about why porridge is good for you, why a certain type of activity, why deep breathing or Tai Chi or any of these actions that you're recommended to do were all based on these 5 elements. So it's another way of envisioning the body. And I've always believed, and Mark, you've been a great guest on the show, and my goodness, you've moved a lot of books educating Americans on basic advice. But I believe that a lot of the advice that you and other experts give can be explained in ways that go beyond what our traditional understanding is. So actually it gives them more credibility. And the reason we wrote the book now was based on a couple of insights. First off, 17% of Americans, in a RAND report, 17% of the listeners right now report excellent health. 1/7. Right? So 83% of us aren't really feeling like we're getting an A in the game of life. And when you look around for reasons for that, part of it is because Western medicine is really good at some things like gunshot to the chest, right? Or, doing a bypass operation, but we're not so good at some of the more chronic issues that plague people, right? Libido problems, sleep, GI problems, depression. And traditional Chinese medicine approaches actually do offer solutions because of 5,000 years of experience with those very issues. And understanding the lymphatic system as part of that also opens up doors of potential treatments that might get us to where we need to be. Now, I was blessed to have an opportunity to work with the dean of the major traditional Chinese medicine institute in the world, which is Beijing University of Chinese Medicine. He's my co-author, so that's his name is Anzhang Zhu, and Dr. Zhu, who's actually has a PhD from the United States. He trained at the University of Illinois, so he actually his English is great, but he also bridges the gap well because he was trained in both East and the West. And I'll share an epiphany that he told me early on that I didn't think I was allowed to say, but I've gotten permission.
Okay.
The big question I had is, where the heck has traditional Chinese medicine been for the last 6-7 decades? Why didn't we know more about it? Why is this Yin Yang You book the first real effort to translate it into Western approaches? It's not the first book of traditional Chinese medicine. There have been many of those, but they're always written only thinking about traditional Chinese medicine and not translating it to the Western mind in a way that could be accessible. And the reason was Mao detested traditional Chinese medicine. Mao felt it was a throwback to colonialist China. It was a remnant from the imperial age. It needed to be expunged from the history books. He wanted China being a modern country without the burden of its history. And so the Chinese went underground. Traditional Chinese medicine continued, but it was actually not endorsed in any capacity. There were no universities that were big and growing. There were no research programs, et cetera. And China, as part of its discussions with other countries, would never bring it up.
Yeah.
Where the new, Premier Xi, the current leadership of China has said, you know what, we can't erase our history. We're going to embrace it. And they've allowed traditional Chinese medicine practitioners to speak more openly, which is why this book could be written in the first place. Yeah. So now we're able to go into China, provide scholarships to learn more about these approaches, do research on which ones work or not. And there's a whole thing, for example, around preventive Qi, which is this is the energy force that gives you more resistance to infections. Where, we all know people get sick all the time. People never get sick. These kinds of approaches explain that. And you know, as a student of Chinese culture, you understand why these ideas resonate. But I love the fact that it takes us into a deeper understanding that might help the 83% of Americans who want to feel better about their health.
Well, that's so interesting because I am so glad you said that. It's really about how do we create health as opposed to just treat disease. How do we create balance in all these systems? Yin yang is a dynamic balance. That's the concept. It's not about whether you have a disease or you're not, but what's in balance or out of balance in your system. Yeah. And the lymphatic system is one of those systems that's in balance or out of balance, like every other system. And I think it's such an important concept. And I actually wrote an article a bunch of years ago about how functional medicine was mirroring a lot of the ancient concepts of traditional Chinese medicine, which is systems thinking. How is everything connected? It's how does everything interact together? It's not just a bunch of separate organs. It's all connected.
And, let me just underline that, Mark. Interestingly, traditional Chinese medicine, because it was created by farmers, is based on ecosystems. On a more holistic approach. Western medicine is more of a hunter-gatherer approach. It's more like sniper shots. Like, I'm going to shoot that cancer, right, and I'll kill it. And if I miss, then I don't kill it. But in traditional Chinese medicine, you've never been taught that way. And that actually, I think, goes back to what Dad was saying about lymphatics. My father-in-law, I just brag on him for 1 second, because one of our earliest interactions, we were playing Trivial Pursuit. You ever play that game?
Yeah.
All right, so I was playing Trivial Pursuit. There was a question. It was, which famous heart surgeon was called Rock Doc by Rolling Stone magazine, because he was the first to play rock music in the operating room.
Gerald Lemole.
Gerald Lemole. My father-in-law slammed his chip down. He knew the answer because he was the answer. But he was always thinking out of the box. And so often in medicine, you're barely keeping up. You're trying to memorize and learn and just stay up with the professor. Dad was always willing to challenge orthodoxy and say there's something more there we're not seeing. As example, by the fact that he was failing at heart transplantation, not because of anything he did technically wrong, but because there was some unexplained process that was closing down arteries, which, by the way, if it closes down arteries in people who had transplants with 22-year-old hearts, what's it doing to 80-year-olds? And why do the conductors never die of heart disease? Well, it seems that maybe they're milking their lymphatics with their arms.
So right, the thoracic duct, right?
Exactly. Okay. So all these insights start to pile up, and you begin to think, well, there's more wisdom here. I'll give you just a completely out of the box idea. So people getting piercings all over the place, right?
Yes.
Well, it turns out that piercings might not be the wisest thing to do in some parts of the body. So as an example, in traditional Chinese medicine, you would never pierce the pinna, because the pinna that's the outer part of the ear, that has very specific purposes. So if you pierce the wrong part of your ear, you might actually create some issues for yourself. Now, this is, again, based on traditional Chinese medicine. If you already gotten a pierce, don't take it out. But it's think about maybe the lobe of your ear is the best place to get pierced, because that's okay with traditional Chinese medicine. And these are the kinds of insights that you want to at least know about before you start doing stuff.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I just a couple of anecdotes. I traveled to China in 1984 when it was still Mao's suits and bicycles and donkey carts, and and I was way in the north, and my girlfriend I was traveling at the time had a terrible migraine. She had really bad migraines. So I ran to find a local doctor, the Chinese doctor, grabbed him. We rode back to the hotel in a donkey cart. He comes in, he feels her pulse, and it was extraordinary, Mehmet. I mean, he literally told her, he didn't ask her any questions. He just told her everything about her period, about her symptoms, about where it was, about how. I was like, whoa, like that was really mind blowing. And then he gave her a prescription, which was a bunch of herbs, and we went to the local herbal pharmacy. We filled it all. It was, roots and bark and who knows, animal parts. I don't know what it was. And it tasted disgusting, but she drank it and got better. And then 10 years later, I went to, and I was like, oh, there's something here. And then I went to China after I worked in Idaho, and I had back surgery, and I had a really bad disc problem. I had severe pain. I had, constant pain for 2 years, and just was miserable, and
Mm.
nothing really worked. And I had physical therapy. I had everything. And I was sitting in the hot tub in the international hotel with some other foreigner, and he was talking about this Chinese doctor that he saw from the Sino-Japanese hospital who fixed his shoulder. And I'm like, oh, what's her name? And I wrote it down. I called her immediately. I went to see her, and I went 3 times a week to her apartment, which was in Beijing at the time. It was winter. It was cold, and she had me. It was kind of illegal to see her as a foreigner, but I kind of paid her under the table, and I would lay on the floor of her Chinese apartment in my underwear, which was basically concrete, with her family watching Chinese soap operas. And she did all these procedures on me, like cupping with these, glass things with hot fire in it to suck out whatever. And then she used gua sha, which is a scraping thing, which is scrape all the stuff. And then she put acupuncture needles everywhere, like the ends of my toes. I mean, it was so intense. And literally within a week, my pain after tears was gone. And within 6 weeks, my calf, which it was shrunken because of the nerve damage, grew back. And I was like, oh, there's something here. There's definitely something here. And I think, she wasn't treating a disease. She was enhancing probably lymphatic flow and blood flow and nerve conduction and all these different modalities that we don't take advantage of in traditional medicine. So it's just such a beautiful model for complementing what we do.
Mark, but the things you're describing that you had done to recover from back pain are what world-class athletes like Mike Phelps did in the Olympics last cycle around, in order to get cupping marks all over his back. The foreword to the book is written by Lindsey Vonn.
Yes, I read that.
The best U.S. Female skier ever, and she uses traditional Chinese medicine for some of the pain from her multiple, tons of knee operations. So I think when world-class athletes are trying out new techniques, when they're using lymphatic massage, it's because they find they can run faster, or jump higher, or shoot better, whatever it is. So the way we learn in Western medicine is we take 1,000 per people and put them into a trial and figure out, but there are not 1,000 similar people. There are all kinds of different kinds of people. Maybe that's not the right way to always figure out subtle changes when you're looking at more of an ecosystem because what the Chinese traditional medicine folks are doing is preparing the soil so you can plant the seeds.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so that's exactly right, Mehmet, and that's the whole concept of health creation, which is what functional medicine is. It's not the science of diagnosing and treating disease; it's a science of creating health. And what both of you are talking about are systems of thinking, whether it's lymphatic science or whether it's traditional Chinese medicine, that aren't about treating a specific condition, but about optimizing the function of your own healing mechanisms. And that's really what has the biggest impact on creating health for people. So now I sort of want to switch to you, Jerry, because can I call you Jerry?
Please do.
Yeah. You're in Trivial Pursuit, so maybe I should call you Dr. Lemole. But
I never get to call him Jerry.
Well, you get to call him Dad, which is, that's okay.
Better.
So tell us about what you've learned about how do we optimize our lymph system, because it really is the key to optimal health and longevity and feeling good. Because by the way, when your lymph system is full of crap, you feel like crap, right?
Exactly.
So how have you found that we can enhance our lymph system? What are the dietary, nutrient, lifestyle factors and other factors that you've discovered make a big difference?
Well, exercise is a big thing, and it's not necessarily, extreme exercise, but deep breathing, for example, walking, lifting light weights are all good exercise that will contract the muscles and pulse forward the lymphatics. So in the exercise realm, I think is very important with your deep breathing and with your movement of the muscles will increase lymphatic flow. The other thing is plenty of good pure water, because you need, there's a sol gel system there. The lymph can turn kind of sticky like a gel, and you want to keep it pure and flowing. So plenty of good clean water. As far as foods, the plants and the fruits. I'm not saying that you have to be a vegetarian, but you should have the majority thinking about plant-based, diet, like,
I call it plant rich.
Plant rich, we want to call it. And green leafy vegetables, ginger, turmeric, spices, things like that will always make. We have a recipe guide we had made there that is all lymphatic lymphatic stimulating. So you keep the polyphenols. For example, in olive oil, polyphenols of olive oil are very important, and that's one of the things that we look for in pure virgin olive oil is the polyphenols. So you have green leafy vegetables, you have herbs and spices, you have onions, garlic, things like that will all increase the lymphatic flow. And then certainly the idea of stress modification to suppress the epinephrine and things and this ACTH and stuff like that, which constricts the flow. So these things in spirituality, doing yoga and meditation and things like that, get the lymphatic flow going. Yoga is called like an internal massage.
Yeah.
The plans of the yoga are to increase the massage of the internal organs. So those are the things you can do. And there's a whole, we have a chapter on meditation and yoga. We have a chapter on exercise and a whole bunch of recipes that you can use. And we tasted some of them, and they're pretty good, aren't they, Mehmet? We tried.
Fabulous.
Yeah. So
absolutely fabulous.
I think those things, those epigenetic, those are things you can do to change your gene, change what the genes produce, and it's important to do that when things we have control of, and once we understand why we're doing it, I think we will apply it more fervently, and we'll have better control of our health.
Yeah. You mentioned yoga, and I think yoga is one of those things that's sort of underappreciated for its effect on lymph flow. And I created a detox program years ago, and I work with a yoga teacher to create a lymph yoga program to actually help move lymph through the body. There's twisting, there's bending, and all the massaging you do. It's really one of the most powerful tools, I think, aside from just walking and regular exercise, but it really can be a powerful factor. And you mentioned the spices and the polyphenols. We don't use them much in this country. It's just amazing to me. Most of our food is so awful and bland. It's flavored with salt, sugar, fat, additives, and chemicals. I just got back from Turkey, where you're from, Mehmet, and I went to the spice bazaar in Istanbul. It was just like a incredible kaleidoscopic bonanza of colors and spices. And I brought some of them back with me that are just used every day as part of their cuisine. And we don't do that here. But those cultures really have understood the role of these things in our diet as health promoting factors. And the olive oil you mentioned, I was where your dad, I guess, Mehmet, had an olive oil orchard.
Exactly.
And I was being schooled on the ways in which you have to actually maximize the polyphenol content, because most people, when they pick olives, they shake the tree and then it falls to the ground, and they pick them up and then they smush them and they get olive oil. They have them hand picked. Every olive is hand picked, so it doesn't hit the ground and start to become acidic and lose its polyphenol content. So, I mean, we have such an amazing world we live in, with all these tools, with all these foods, with all these spices, with all these potential therapies that we don't take advantage of that help enhance our health. And I think that if people just pay a little attention to what does mess up their lymph system and what enhances their lymph function, their health and their life will be a lot better, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
So do you have a daily lymph practice, or how do you think about incorporating into your life? I mean, there's so many things you have to do, right? Eat right, meditate, exercise, but how do you start to make simple changes that could help people say, okay, I'm going to do this because this is
at my age, I'm limited to walking of 3 miles an hour for a mile or two in the mornings, and then I lift 5-pound weights just to get them so I can play golf with this guy. Otherwise, he tries to embarrass me, on the golf course.
Oh, what do you mean? He's not competitive. I've never seen him.
Hold on a second. Let me just be clear here. Dad is 84 years old, and for any golfers out there, he shot his age 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And then and that was the warm up. The next weekend, we played my dad and I against my two brothers-in-law, and we beat them, which is unheard of.
Wow.
And Dad, as he hit the winning putt, winked at them with great joy in his eyes. So I knew that he really wanted to was to win.
Well, I might achieve hitting my age when I'm maybe 140.
Exactly, like most of us.
I'm not very good at golf. Well, that's
But
amazing.
Mark, can I offer? But the thing is that these common ailments that you're talking about, that Dad was listening through, I mean, they exist because we don't have good solutions for them, right? So if we had a great solution for libido, and there are some pharmaceuticals, obviously, that we can start using now, especially for women, but the Chinese say, goji berries, nuts, Siberian ginseng, they have their game plan, lychee berries, which are, lychee, that fruit is sort of reminds you of something. It looks like testicles.
Really?
But things like sleep, the Chinese use kanji. They use a lot of kanji, which is a grain, but they also use massage. And the main tip for massage is it stimulates lymphatic flow, which Dad showed, and others have proven. You massage your feet, you stimulate thoracic duct lymph flow. So that's very hard to even connect those two structures. How does your feet affect lymphatic flow in your chest? On the other hand, the Chinese do acupressure and acupuncture in the feet, and they can stimulate parts of the brain that coincide with that spot. So there are clearly connections between parts of our body that we don't understand with the traditional Western model that you and I, all three of us, participated in. Doesn't mean they're not right. We haven't discovered them yet. We will one day, but why wait?
No, it's so true. It's so true. I think the ways in which these ancient systems have developed models for maintaining health and optimizing health and creating health is so foreign to how the three of us were trained in medical school, which was find the disease, kill the disease, and then move on with just that was it. And it's exciting that you both sort of are coming at this in a different way that help us sort of understand a new way of dealing with some of the challenging conditions that we suffer from. And I think, fatigue is another one that people have. And I think fatigue is probably really connected to lymph flow, because fatigue is connected to the toxic burden and to inflammation and oxidative stress. Yeah. And if your lymph system is not working, it's hard to function with that.
And a hot bath will also stimulate lymphatic flow, most likely. It also happens to be the foundation of traditional Chinese medicine treatment of depression and fatigue. So if you Google, right, if everyone listening now to buy a computer, Google, why am I? It will auto-complete so tired. It will do it. It's amazing. The first several entries are all going to be tired. Right, but why am I sounds like a philosophical, a spiritual quest. It's not. Why am I will autocomplete on Google so tired or so exhausted. Because that's the number one thing we search.
You have come upon the lymph system as one of those critically foundational systems that has to function in order for us to be healthy. And when it's not, we age quickly. So Dr. Lemole, tell us about how you came to understand that this is true, that it's not just about our cardiovascular system or neurologic system or musculoskeletal system, that there's this whole other system in there that's pretty much ignored and we don't really a lot of treatments for, but that actually responds to a lot of things that you talk about in your book that are available to everybody. So tell us, how did we sort of miss this, and why were you interested in lymph system and how it impacts every aspect of our health? I mean, you've called it the secret river of health. What do you mean?
Well, when we were doing the heart transplants way back when, then I was involved in the first 5, and they became very personal friends because we stayed with them for months. We didn't know what the heck was what to expect, what was going on. So within a short period of time, we had given these people good, healthy hearts with wonderful blood vessels. And within a short period, a year or two, year and a half, they all died from galloping atherosclerosis. Their vessels had turned to 90-year-old vessels. And it was not only a professional failure, but a personal loss. And so it always stayed in the back of my mind. And when I left Houston, I was chief at Temple University School of Medicine, and we had a professor of pathology there, Betty Lausch, who was interested in foam cells. So we got together and did a project on rhesus monkeys. We ligated their lymphatics from their heart, and sure enough, they developed early atherosclerosis. So I always kept this in the back of my mind, and I'd observe when we did coronary bypasses, we'd have sclerotic little white vessels following along the veins. And so I biopsied them, and they were sclerotic lymph vessels, and they were not there in the aortic valve or the mitral valve with no coronary disease. So, but it's so hard to measure the lymphatics. You can't measure a level of something, or it's a low pressure system. You can't. It's very difficult. So, consequently, for many years, nobody really did a whole lot, and up until the last 10 years or so, there was nothing really said about the lymphatics. But in 1981, I wrote a paper. I figured the best paper I knew was Society of Thoracic Surgeons. I should have been in some other journal, but because the surgeons weren't too interested. But we showed that there was reverse cholesterol transport was the relationship with the lymphatics was important, and that's how the actual cholesterol got out of the arterial wall into to the venous system to the liver by way of the lymphatics, and that was 40 years ago.
So your blood circulation and your lymph circulation are connected, and they're interacting and moving things around like cholesterol all the time. And if
Yeah.
one's not working, the whole
Well,
system kind of breaks down.
the whole beauty of the lymphatic system is that it is responsible for re-regulating our fluids, because we lose about 10 or 15% of our fluid outside our vascular system into our interstitial, or this tissue between the cells. So we have to get that back in. The lymphatics are responsible for getting it back in. The lymphatics are responsible for getting every fat molecule back into the system. They're responsible for getting large proteins, things like when you have a leaky gut and you have say casein or gliadin. The only way it can get away from the sampling mucosa is to go through the lymphatics and get tested by a dendritic cell to see if it's good, bad, or ugly. And that's what it's all about. And if we don't have the lymphatic system, it just doesn't happen.
Well, so essentially what you're saying is when you have all these molecules that run around your blood and they get in your tissue, then they go out in your tissues, and your body has to clean it up, and then it has to check that if it's okay or not,
Exactly.
and it gets back into your lymph system and your blood system, then you can kind of regulate it.
So it's very difficult to measure the anything, because it's a very low pressure system. So we can't measure like the arterial wall pressure or the lymphatic pressure. The flow depends completely on the motion of exercise, what your muscles are doing, squeezing them, the arterial pulsation, and the its own innate pulsations. It has its own pulsation. It has smooth muscle in it. It has sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. So it sends signals all throughout the body to have a general inflammatory response. And then the important thing, it has to shut off that inflammatory response. And if it doesn't shut it off, you get autoimmune or chronic inflammation. And that's what we're facing in a pandemic now.
Yes, I want to get more into its functions, but for those of you who don't know what it is, I'd love, Jerry, for you to explain, what is actually the lymph system? Where is it? How do we find it? What does it look like? What does it do? Give us sort of a background, because I think most people understand it. It's, you have a liver and a kidney and a brain, but where is the lymph system?
That was the problem in fact, that it really deserves, it's a system that deserves, but it's always used as an appendage to something. It says, oh, the lymphatics are with cancer. They think a lot of people that it attracts attention because of the cancer, but it's a system of its own that is usually lies between the artery and the vein. The lymph channel does. And but we don't. When we was in medical school, we didn't talk about the lymphatic. We talked about nerve, artery, vein. That was the neurovascular bundle. But the lymphatics are in there, and they have to. If they go into spasm, they are not clearing the toxins. They're not sending the messages of the immune system. They're not getting the signals of protein and fat that will send messages out to the body, and then the messages aren't going back, that shut off the inflammatory response. The beginning of the response you want, it's acute inflammation is a good thing. It kills everything inside. It also attacks the normal tissue as it's getting rid of the toxins. But at some point we have to send in cells and proteins to come in and stop that inflammation. And if it's delayed, there's more damage in the area. So as long everything that causes it to delay is caused by the lymphatic system not either being stagnant, not getting good water supply, not being pulsatile, being dilated, or being constricted. For example, if you smoke cigarettes, you will get sclerosis of the lymphatic systems,
Mm.
and cortisol release does it, and adrenal release does it. So over the long haul, that's why stress creates problems. And what's interesting to me is we always say when we do these studies, you say, "Oh, look what people do better if they exercise. They do better if they have stress management. They do better if they eat a lot of vegetables and fruits." Point of fact is, all those three things increase lymphatic flow. The
Yeah.
exercise goes through the thoracic duct, and you breathe, the diaphragm sweeps it up. It's got one-way valves, and it makes the fluid go into the venous system and to the liver. Polyphenols and flavonoids are strong lymphagogues. I mean, they suppress inflammatory markers. They do a wonderful things, and that's why we know that vegetarian type plant-based diet is helpful. And the same way with stress modification. If you're relaxing your body, you're not secreting the hormones that will cause sclerosis of the lymphatic vessels. So it's interesting to me that all the three things that increase lymphatic flow are things that will help every chronic degenerative disease.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but it gives you an understanding. And if you get that understanding, you'll be more apt to do what you're supposed to do, because it's not a mystery. Then why does this happen? Because you can explain what happens with lymphatic flow when you do these things.
Well, so what you're saying is really striking, that there's this system in the body that's been mostly neglected by medicine that is incredibly important for almost every function of the body. That's our waste disposal system. That's our part of our immune system. That's part of our cholesterol transport system. That samples everything from the environment that we need to manage and determine if it's us or something else. And that there's no way to measure easily. There's no test really we can do to see how it's working. But from the science, we know how much it can be damaged by our lifestyle and by our diet and by smoking and by stress and all these things that we don't really think about are related to our lymph system. I mean, we know if someone gets cancer and they have surgery and their
Yeah.
lymphs taken out, they get the swelling and the big edema and it's kind of nasty. Or there's this thing called lymphedema where you can't clear all that. But most of us really have never really thought much about the lymph system other than, okay, well, we have one and maybe we should be, getting a massage once in a while. But what have you seen directly from the science that says that the lymph system is actually helping to prevent all these chronic diseases? Because it's not something that I think most people know.
Yeah.
This book is really radical because nobody's really written a book about this before.
Yeah.
And I've looked for this information because I've been really interested in how. I mean, I was working on a book on food and trying to see how foods influence the lymph system, and it was really hard to kind of come up with a lot of information. So you're really uncovering a treasure trove of wisdom about how to care for our bodies in a new way that allows us to actually activate and heal our lymph system to create health and longevity.
Well, what I did was, I recognized that the chronic degenerative diseases that we're most fearful of, for example, cardiac or cancer or neurologic diseases, all had a basis in the lymphatics. And going through researching the literature, I'm talking about the PubMed and the medical literature is very clear, at least in the research areas in the arenas, that you can create lymphatic spasm by oxidative stress. There's a paper like in 2014 by Taggart and New England Journal that showed that what happens to the macrophage can actually carry cholesterol through the arterial wall, and when they get stressed with oxidative stress, the cytoskeleton of the macrophage actually freezes. And the way you can so the way it used to sneak through was being very plastic and could work its way through the wall. But when it gets its cytoskeleton frozen by oxidative stress, it can't go anywhere, and it just causes more inflammation in that tissue. What can obviate that is NAC. and it gets rid of that. It gets and they show, at least in the research, that these macrophages start moving again. And the literature, the research literature, is replete with, not these are researchers, not clinicians, and so consequently the next move has to be to move it from the research area into the clinical world. And the same thing with in inflammatory bowel disease. They've shown, the University of Washington has shown that actually there's lymphatic obstruction of the lymph channels coming from the colon or the gut that are blocked, and they actually can see that on the studies. And so that it's getting into, our world, but it's still not there yet because it's hard to measure. It's a low pressure system, and you can change it with many things. Same way with the lymphatics and the fat cells, and the adipose tissue is now an endocrine tissue, and it works very, very closely in relation to the fat tissue, to the lymphatic tissue. And in the research labs, they found that diabetic mice, for example, you can get 130 times the amount of leakage in the lymphatic system. And how do you get a big gut and big belly? You get porous lymphatics, and the triglycerides and the IgA and all the fat and stuff, instead of going where it should be processed, goes into the fat and stays there and compresses the lymphatics and compresses the and creates a situation where you have uh, bad hormones come out of the fat because they're in a chronic stage.
So what you're saying is super interesting because, clinically we see people who are puffy, right? You feel them. They're like puffy, and they have fluid
Right.
retention, and they have puffy faces, and it's inflammation. But
Yeah.
what we're really seeing is an example of how the lymph system isn't properly working to clear all the fluid in the tissues.
Right,
Is that right?
that's exactly right. And once you get that concept, once you think about that in that way, you can't go back to the other way and say, well, what is it causing it? It becomes clear then. You say, well, it's just not enough clearance of these toxins from the tissue, and then not enough response. For example, what looks like in the research is these resolvin, and protectin, the fat that's coming in and blocking any of these inflammasomes. And
Yeah.
the lymphatics, there's several articles that show the relationship between the inflammasome and the lymphatic clearance and the resolvin and protectin. That's, there's articles already written on that in the medical scientific literature.
So basically, the system that turns on inflammation, turns off inflammation, is all regulated by the lymph system. And
Exactly.
if that's dysregulated, you get puffy and swollen, and you look in the mirror and you're like, why am I so puffy and swollen? Well, that's a big part of it. I want to talk about why this is so important for longevity, and why it's in the title of your book, because I want to live to be 120. I don't know what you guys are shooting for. I'm maybe going to go a little longer if I can, if everything's working. Why is the lymph system so important to longevity?
Well, as you know, the longevity is related to how much damage you do in your local tissues. I mean, basically,
Mm,
you measure the tips of the chromosomes, and you say, well, if they're short, then I've had it. And so everybody's trying to extend the chromosomes. And the point is that the best way you can avoid trauma to the tissue, and autophagy, and the idea of cleaning up the tissue. We now know, and it's been shown in a lot of the journals, that the dead cells don't go away. They just cause an inflammatory response. And
yeah.
it's up to the monocytes to come in and pick those dead cells up and take that away by way of the lymphatics. Now,
Ah.
if the lymphatics don't have a signal and don't present that signal to the immune system, it's not going to be able to send anything in there, and the way they come in and out of it is through the lymphatic system. So if you keep your tissue in good shape and avoid the damaging that occurs over the years through chronic inflammation, you're going to be in good shape when it comes to 125.
All right. So basically, it affects everything, and so you mapped out how it affects the gut, how it affects the brain, how
Yeah.
it affects their immune system and cancer, how it affects your heart disease risks. All
Yeah.
of these things are things that we don't really include the lymphatic system as part of our
We
framework for thinking about it. But you're introducing this idea and saying we have to, right?
well,
So
we didn't know it's 10 years ago that the brain had a lymphatic system. We thought, and we were taught all in medical school, there was no lymphatic clearance
yeah,
to the brain. We know now that there is a lymphatic system, and goes through the it's called glymphatics because it includes the microglial cells, and
those are the
so
immune cells in the
the
brain.
immune cells in the brain, and they actually shrink along with the neuron cells so they can get more fluid into the interstitium, and they sweep away the beta amyloid, and it goes on the other side. It's picked up by the dura lymphatics, the dural lymphatics down the deep cervical lymph channels, and cleared that way. Now, if you sleep on your side, it clears better than if you sleep on your back. By the way, if you're a mouse, but
Yeah.
there are ways, there are ways that this can be ameliorated, and these are things we're just learning, year by year, and
Yeah.
it's the whole thing is changing. So I think that people are going to get interested in the lymph system, but all these are interrelated.
Yeah, so it sort of reminds me when I was in Hawaii last year, and I moved to this house, and the local garbage collectors had a rule which they wouldn't collect your garbage unless the lid was off the garbage can. And so I had all these people over, and I had so much garbage, and I put it out with the lids on, and they didn't come week after week. And it was just, what happened was terrible. All the maggots came and everything started rotting and smelling. And so
Yeah,
basically, your lymph system is like the garbage man and cleans
exactly,
up all the waste that's
exactly.
happening in your body, all the metabolic waste. Autophagy is this important idea that we self clean and we take all the old parts, we recycle them, we
Right,
renew ourselves, and we get rid of all the garbage. But without your functioning lymph system, you can't do that,
can happen.
right?
That's
Right.
exactly
So
right.
You want to know my secret for living a long and happy and healthy life? Well, all I have to do is check out my weekly newsletter, Mark's Picks, where I share my favorite tips for health, longevity, well-being, and lots more. Check it out, and link below.
Well, I think you mentioned a lot of things, Jerry, that were good, but there are a few things you didn't really talk about. Like traditional Chinese medicine has Tai Chi, which I think is an interesting form of exercise that I imagine, because of the kinds of motions in there, does move lymph around quite a bit.
Well, I
You know?
believe, the problem is once you start thinking this way, everything is expressed in the lymphatic clearance,
Mhm.
and the fact of the matter is, there's no question that Tai Chi can get us into positions like yoga does, sort of. It doesn't look like you're going to anywhere, but they're internally the lymphatics are being massaged and milked, and there's no obstruction to them. The other important thing is the spasm of the lymphatics is significant, because with cortisol and epinephrine and stress, they go into spasm. So consequently,
Wow.
it's not nothing's going anywhere. So relaxing, like in Tai Chi or yoga, it will increase the flow.
That's something I didn't know, that your actually lymph vessels have muscles, smooth
Yeah,
muscles. I thought they were just passively massaged by your own muscles, by
yeah.
regular muscles, to get the flow back. But that's fascinating. So they're basically listening to your thoughts.
They have a
Your lymph vessels are
peristalsis.
listening to your thoughts, and if you're stressed, they're not happy.
Exactly. I mean, they have their own peristalsis. They have nerves ending, sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves, going into the brain and sending signals out, both protein, signals and nerve signals, to instruct the rest of the body whether they want to release complement or general inflammatory response from the liver. So they're in touch with all these organs. That's the beauty of the lymphatics.
Yeah.
It's not just doing one thing and having the brain respond. And the other thing you were talking about was the skin. there's a lot of lymphatics right in the skin, and also right in the other skin we have, which is the GI epithelium, because there's more lymphatics in the GI tract than there is anywhere else in the body. There's more
Yeah,
endocrine than there is in any other endocrine organ. There's more
yeah,
neural than there is in the spinal cord. So
yeah.
these are things that we don't recognize, but the lymph integrates that. It's like it's leading the symphony, because it does communicate with every other system. You see.
That's amazing. So you've talked about a lot of things that can really help. What you eat, polyphenols, a plant-rich diet, walking and exercise, yoga, stress reduction, meditation, phytochemicals. All these things are
Massage.
great.
Uh,
Massage. I'm pretty lazy, so I actually want to ask you about a few things that I do that I think might be good. And so what I do is I basically like to take a steam and an ice bath, and I get really really hot and then ice cold.
yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah, evidently the BDNF and things like that get increased, when you do that. And the fact is that using a sauna, for example, will draw out toxins through your sweat. So there is, and that all comes from lymphatic cooperation with the cells to get the extra fluid to get you sweating on your skin. So it all has to be in accordance with a systematic approach to it.
And massage is my other favorite thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. That we
I
used to.
just lay there. So tell us about the difference between regular massage and lymphatic massage. Does regular massage work, or do you have to do special lymphatic massage? And what is lymphatic massage?
Lymphatic massage is very light. You don't press hard like we usually do with them, and but it's always directed towards the heart. It's always directed upwards towards that. And when we were doing experiments years ago, we would cannulate the animal. I don't, it was dog animals. We don't do that anymore, but we used to cannulate the lymphatic duct to measure the flow. And when things slowed down, all we had to do was massage the back of the neck of the dog, and it would just increase multiple. Yeah. So we know, in fact, there are papers that show lymphatic flow, with massage in animal lab scientific papers. So it's very very productive.
Now, if you just get a regular massage, does that work, or you have to have a
Regular
special?
massage works great. You don't. I mean, lymphatic massage people. It's are specialists in that they do that. For example, things like macroglossia. When some of these kids, unfortunate kids, have enlarged tongues and stuff, they say they can help their speech by lymphatic massage, reducing the size of the tongue that is interfering with the normal speech.
That's really, really impressive. So we have a whole new thing to think about. But the good news is is that the things we have to do for our lymphatic system are the same things we have to do to basically treat everything else, to keep our heart healthy and our brain healthy and our prevent cancer and deal with
Exactly.
energy and fatigue and stress. So it's beautiful. You don't have to add a whole bunch of new things, but there are new things. What are the surprising new things in your book that people maybe haven't heard of that will help them to enhance the function of their lymph system?
Well, I think and Ted Spiker, the professional writer who helped, he kind of dumbed this down for me. I kind of put in words that may not be the easiest thing to read, and he wrote it out nicely. But so the idea is that it's important to get, for example, these inflammatory setups that by leaving a toxin on your tissue too long, not only does it delay the healing of that, but it also prevents the cells coming in, that reparative ones too. So that what's interesting to me is that we have this inflammatory situation that can be changed by things like NAC, N-acetylcysteine, can be
Yeah.
changed by oxidative stress. So what impressed me with the research is that, in fact, certain that oxidative stress causes bad problems in our tissue, and that certain supplements, I want to say, can help obviate that and get our tissue back to health.
That's great. So there's things you can take also that would be helpful. What are
Yeah.
besides N-acetylcysteine, which is actually one of the most important things
Yeah.
we can do, both for just general health, for detoxification, for inflammation, oxidative stress, and even helping with COVID.
Yeah.
What else have you found that?
Well, let me give you an example. Pterostilbene. Pterostilbene is like resveratrol, but it's 4 or 5 times more absorbable, and it's the stuff in the blueberries that you get the pterostilbene, and it's so you can take the pterostilbene and get a antioxidative effect. You take resveratrol, quercetin, things like that. Those are all in that same polyphenol family, And then what's interesting is, and one of the reasons I got interested in this, there's a chemical called Daflon. It's 40 years old. It's made in France. It's sold for varicose veins and hemorrhoids. If you look at what it does the same thing in the venous system that we need to do in the arterial system. And what is it? This miracle drug is got diosmin and hesperidin, 2 flavonoids. That's all it is. That you take.
Plant compounds.
This plant compounds, exactly.
Amazing, miracle. Well, this is incredible. I think everybody needs to get a copy of your book, Lymph Longevity: The Untapped Secret to Health. It's available now everywhere you get your books, and I think you will not be sorry. And I think, Mehmet, I just want to spend the last few minutes of the podcast talking about yin yang and you, because for me, the origin of my thinking about health and disease was from studying ancient Chinese texts, the Yellow Emperor's classic, internal medicine textbook of Chinese medicine that was written thousands of years ago that I read in college. And it helped me to sort of think about how diseases begin, how the body's organized in a different way. And it really, in a way, was the foundation of me leading towards functional medicine. And it allowed me to actually be in Western medical school without being too brainwashed. And I understood there was a bigger framework. So how have you sort of gotten more into this as you sort of learned about it, and what are the sort of take homes that you want to share with people about how traditional Chinese medicine can intersect with traditional Western medicine?
Well, one very visual response, and I'll show it on the screen for anyone who's watching this, but I'll give I'll send you a picture of this. But this is from a page early in the book, and you can see it's a tongue and an ear. Yeah. And it's designed to show you that there's a reflection of every part of your body on the tongue and likewise on the ear. So if you go into a Chinese facility, they will have you stick your tongue out, and then they will diagnose you based on that. Now, my first exposure to this, Mark, it was 1993. I was just finishing my training. No, 1992. I wasn't even done yet. I remember this because I was uncertain what I was doing. And Dad took me to China with him. Now, Dr. Lemole is an iconic figure over there because early on, he was operating at a major center in the U.S. that some of the Chinese leading physicians were allowed to go train in. And remember, this is back in the 80s when you couldn't get out of the country. So they'd all come and trained under him. So they all admired him. He treated them with respect. And they weren't doing bypass surgery at the time in China. No. Because no one had bypass disease. They were eating, Chinese food that era was free of saturated fats, not a lot of sugar. They were eating healthy meals. And they were all, as you mentioned, in their mouse suits, riding their bikes to work. Right, everything you said you experienced in 1984, I experienced, 6-7 years later, and so I was sitting there, and I went to a hospital that was a traditional Western hospital, but it also had an Eastern hospital element to it. And if you went in and went to the West, you went to the operating suite where I was teaching them bypass surgery ostensibly. If you went to the Eastern wing of the hospital, they had thousands of people waiting in lines. I mean, there's 1.5 billion people, so everything's big, but they're waiting in line. You step up to the front, you stick your tongue out. They look at all the subtleties of your tongue. Is there a coating? What kind of a coating? Is it beefy red? Things that in the West we look at. Is there
a crack? What's the shape? Is there scalloping? Right,
all that matters. And you think about it. If everyone sticks their tongue out now, looks in the rearview mirror or the bathroom mirror, wherever you happen to be, don't stare if you're driving. But the tongue shapes are all different, and why would we ignore that as a clue? Why would you not want to take that into account when you're figuring out? So they would look at the tongue, then they check your pulse. And as you know, the pulse is much different. In America, we check the pulse to see if it's regular. But we don't get into the subtleties of it too often. Sometimes at crisis, you might look for a thready pulse or some other subtlety. But most doctors don't know anything about pulses. We're not taught it. So in China, they put 3 fingers on the pulse. They look at subtleties like how fast it goes up, how fast it goes down. Is it a flat top or a pointy top? All these things like a mountain range might be described by someone who knew about mountains. And so all this subtlety would come together and they'd start diagnosing how those 5 elements that I described to you earlier. And we walk you through this in the book in a non-intimidating way so you actually understand the philosophy of traditional Chinese medicine taught by the world leaders. So that people know things really well, can make them accessible.
Make it simple.
Right? If you don't know it that well, it gets confusing. And that's when people tell me, oh, it's confusing. What you really are saying, you don't really understand it all the way. because Einstein didn't think physics was confusing. And they're not many Einsteins, I get it. But, this stuff, if you understand it well, it becomes come alive. And so that experience, it steeled me for a lifelong interest in how the Chinese people treat their ailments amongst themselves. And I think that as we learn more about the parts of traditional Chinese medicine that can be added to Western medicine. So again, it's not alternative, it's complementary. Use them together. Depending on what your problem is, you want both. I mentioned libido earlier. There are medications that can help with erectile dysfunction. There are medications that can help the female brain with libido. But a lot of times it's more subtle than that, right? And sometimes you're better off taking Siberian ginseng and lychee nuts. And it's even richer in the GI system because there's so many unknowns in our intestinal system where there are more bacteria, there are 10 times more bacteria than cells in our body, that it makes sense that a holistic approach where you don't say, I'm going to sniper shoot those 2 trillion bacteria, doesn't work so well. Maybe we're better off saying the bamboo shoots or bergamot in our kanji is a better sort of gentle nudge. If you need something more urgent because you have ulcerative colitis or celiac disease, well, then obviously we have more aggressive approaches that can be used. But shouldn't we nudge first before we push?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of techniques in traditional Chinese medicine, from Qigong to Tai Chi to acupuncture to gua sha to cupping to massage and obviously the herbal medicines. But, what really struck me when I went there was that they really in the culture understand that food is medicine. And actually in the Chinese language to say, we say, I'm going to take my medicine. They don't say that. They say, I'm going to eat my medicine. Chur yao, like chur fan means eat rice. Chur yao means eat your medicine. Yeah. That's literally how they talk about
you learn a lot from language, right? Eskimos have 7 words for white.
That's right. And I think what you're describing is that, it's easy to dismiss, this is just, a bunch of sort of pagan traditional stuff that may not really be that scientific. But, when you see it in action and when you see the results and the outcomes, and I personally have experienced it over and over again, you can't ignore it. Just because we don't have, $1 billion of randomized trials on it doesn't mean it's not worth incorporating, because 1, it's low risk, 2, it's relatively inexpensive, and 3, it makes sense now, given a lot of our scientific understanding about how the body is truly organized. So I'm really glad you did this and bring it to light. Your voice on this is going to be important because, I think we need all the tools we can get. We are a very sick society. Like you said, what is it? 83% of Americans don't feel good. 88% are metabolically unhealthy. I mean, we're 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the COVID cases and deaths. Why is that? It's because we don't know how to take care of ourselves. If you love that last video, you should check out the next one for sure on getting to the root cause of all disease.
Genetics and family history is just one piece of the puzzle. It's not what makes us make all the decisions in the world, but we take that into account, as well as all their other risk factors, like you mentioned, like type 2 diabetes.